Good morning or good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's very good to see you again. 1 month after our nice meeting in Lisbon, or 1 month and something. It seems that a lot of time has passed, given all that has been happening and everything that we have been doing in between. But let me tell you that I really enjoyed to have you all here in Lisbon. The conference was very successful, and the meeting, I think, as well. So it's very good to see you again, and I'm already looking forward to meeting you again in person in December in New York. So this meeting, and I'm going to be brief in my initial notes, but because we need the time to discuss the documents, let me just convey a warm hello, and thank you for joining us to Robert Buchanan, PIOB representative. Thank you very much, Robert. It has been some time since you have been with us, so thank you very much. The time for you is not the most convenient, as it is not for China and others, but thank you very much. We'll try to make it as effective as possible. I'd like also to congratulate, or sorry, to thank everybody that is attending, besides the board meetings and the staff, the official observers, of course, but also other observers joining us today online. And thank you for your interest in the IESBA meeting and in the matters that we will be discussing. We have two apologies today, Paul Muthara and Christelle Martin. They are not, unfortunately, able to join us, but they have sent their apologies. And of course, they will contribute as much as possible afterwards by reading the notes of the meeting or watching the meeting or whatever. So before I give the floor to the project team, I'd just like to very briefly make here a little bit of a recap of what happened before, where we are, and why we are here today, to try to avoid any doubts or any misunderstandings. We need to be clear, and above all, the board has to have clear what we are discussing and what's the objective. So very briefly, the journey here was that in December 2024, we approved 2 work streams, we decided to move forward with a project to develop standards and another one to develop NAM. The priority by the time was allocated to the standard setting work, and the project, the initial plan, or the plan that we approved in December 2024, was that in December 2025, we would be exposing or putting out an exposure draft on the FCG standards. That was the initial plan. During 1 year, there was a lot of outreach, a lot of developments, reflections, and etc. And in June, during the first months of the year of 2025, in June 2025, the board discussed, as you will recall, refreshed general strategy for the IESBA, where we decided to focus more on adoption and implementation, non-authoritative material, more engagement with and better engagement with stakeholders, better communication, and etc. And a part of this refreshed strategy was reflected on the decisions that we made with respect to firm culture and governance. So in June 2025, building on this more broad reflection about how can we better serve stakeholders, how can we better engage, and about how the best way to ensure the robustness, effectiveness, and usefulness of our standards, but also based on the feedback that we got over the first 6 months of 2025 from our stakeholders, we decided to resequence the work on firm culture and governance. And this was the word that we used because it's really the word that reflects what we have decided. And resequencing in June meant that we decided to hold for a while the decisions that we need to make on a framework. We decided to focus on developing some non-authoritative material, but also undertaking a number of these initiatives to engage better with stakeholders, to make clearer the objectives of this project, to make stakeholders better understand what we want with this project, what we want to achieve in terms of public interest benefits and objectives. But also it was necessary for us to reflect a little bit further upon the feedback that we got and our own thinking. We needed to go a little bit deeper into some of the topics and into the design, the future design of this project. So in June, and this is in the minutes, and for whoever watches the recorded video of the meeting, it's what it has been decided there. We decided to resequence, and resequence means that we decided to undertake a lot of initiatives and produce some materials so that in June 2026 we can make a decision on the framework that we had decided to develop, better informed, with more engagement with stakeholders, better understanding from our stakeholders about the public interest objectives of this project, but also upon feedback that we need to collect on what is more effective, what's the more effective way to get where we want to get, what kind of product should we deliver, what are the most important elements of this framework, etc. So it was about giving ourselves and stakeholders a little bit more time to ensure an even more robust decision that we need to make about which kind of framework are we going to develop. So we have options, and that's clear that we have options. We haven't decided yet that this is going to be a set of standards based on the principles or on the viewpoints that we have been developing. It can be a set of standards. It can be one simple or overarching or high-level standard and NAM and guidance attached to this principle. It can be a framework that we will develop outside the code, so with a different nature and a different force, so to speak. The only option that is not on the table, and I want to be clear about this, because I think I don't need to be, but for everyone to have it clear, the only option that it's not on the table is not to do anything. So that's not an option. All the considerations that we made and that the board decided upon in terms of how much this project is needed, how much we as an ethics board need to do something around firm culture and governance, around the public interest objectives and considerations underlying this project. So not doing anything is not an option. What we decided to do in June was to develop some, what we call them viewpoints. They could have another name. The viewpoints, as we discussed in this September, are not a product themselves, an end product. It's an instrument to allow us to better engage with stakeholders and test if this is how much each one of these principles of how much each one of these elements is necessary, useful, effective, actionable, etc., in order to have more practical information to support the decision that we will make in June 2026. So, and again, viewpoints are not a product, are not in itself. They can become one day, but for the time being, they are being conceived as an instrument of engagement with stakeholders. In June, we will decide what are we going to do with the framework that we still want to develop, but may have different formats, different contents, etc. At the same time, we decided to focus on non-authoritative material, as our stakeholders have been recommending, namely considering the feedback collected in the roundtables, and we will be providing a few other elements and undertaking some initiatives, which in any case will be linked to these viewpoints, to these principles or draft principles that we want to have ready in December for the board to consider. So this is the context, this is where we are, and the objective of this meeting, of this interim meeting between September and December, is to allow the board to consider the developments on these viewpoints and other materials that we agreed that we needed to develop, namely an overarching document, explaining why we are doing this, what was the journey here, what are the objectives, and etc., to allow the board to consider these documents before we go to the December board meeting, so that when we get there, we have full consideration of all the perspectives and of the the contributions that the board members may want to bring, but also some questions. If you have questions, please make your questions, because we need to be absolutely clear. And one thing that we need to ensure is not only clarity, but absolute full consistency across the board and the staff about everything. So any questions should be, it's okay, it's fine to ask questions in case there is something that it's not clear. With this, I'm going to hand over to the project team. The project team has been working hardly, not only in refining the viewpoints in accordance to the substantive feedback collected from the board or received from the board in September, but also developing other materials which they will present today. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to the project team for the work that they have been doing and how hard they have been working. And I'm going to hand over to Jeff, I suppose, or?
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriela, for the introduction. And again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening or good night for everybody. Great to see you all this morning. First, before I start, just a quick apology for myself that I might have to step out a little early before the session finish. I have to catch a flight, unfortunately. So I'm sitting in a booth somewhere at the lounge. But with that, we might kick off. And thanks, Laura, for controlling the deck. If you can move to the next slide, please. So, of course, this morning in a virtual call, there's only one session, and which is on firm culture and governance, as Gabriela has explained and give us a bit of an introduction of where we got to at this point. Now, this morning, there are three pieces of documents that we want to get your feedback on, particularly the draft contextual piece, the overarching piece, which is to explain the connectivity or the relationship, the structural relationship perhaps between the eight FCG elements. And the last one is a revised draft principles on the incentives and disincentives, which in September, you might recall, that was called IESBA Viewpoints on Rewards. But before we get to that, just want to give you a bit of an update on some of the outreaches that we've been involved in, and also our coordination activity with IESB. So if Laura, if you can move to the next page after this, thank you so much. There are two meetings that I want to give you a brief update on during this session. The first one is with the IOSCO Committee 1 that took place a few weeks ago, and that was attended by Gabriela, Tomoyo, and Ken in person, and I also attended virtually. At that session, Gabriela provided a brief update on a number of the IESBA work streams and projects, including this particular project, Firm Culture and Governance. So in Gabriela's update, she's provided, amongst other things, also provided an explanation of the resequencing approach, and of course some of the things that we've been doing in terms of such as developing the IESBA viewpoints or the draft principles. And so we have received some pretty good feedback from the C1 committee. Ultimately, they maintained retained the support for this project, but also continued support for the development of the FCG framework. And certainly, as you've heard Gabriela said earlier, that really for this board, it is not an option to do nothing. And they certainly supported that view, and they've expressed that view as well, that they agree that it is not an option for this board to do nothing, given the topic and given the remit of this board. They've given us some feedback on a number of things in terms of the different elements. They've provided some comments on proportionality and scalability. There were also some comments about the transparency element as well. So in addition to some of these comments and providing us some general, expressing the support for this project and the work that we are doing, They've also obviously noted the linkage between the IESBA viewpoints or the draft principles with ISQM1. They recognized certainly that our continuing coordination with IEESB it's an important part of this project. And there was also a suggestion for us to perhaps conduct a gap analysis of sort to look at what is currently in the code and what we're doing with these IESBA viewpoints, and also what is in ISKM1, and see whether there's what the gaps are, what the relationships are, what the linkages are, and which is of course what we are doing at this moment with the project team. So again, some good feedback from IOSCO. If I can move to the next slide. The other update I want to give you is on the Stakeholders Advisory Council meeting, which took place a couple of days ago, Tuesday and Wednesday. This is a meeting for both IESBA and IAASB. And so we went through a number of agenda items, including technology, but we also had the opportunity for Gabriela to provide an update of the SCG project as well. And again, as you know, the SAG is it's represented by a broad range of stakeholders, and they're there to provide a strategic input. And we always get very good engagement from the SAG members. And this one's no different. We've got some good feedback from the SAG members during the meeting a couple of days ago. Again, there was support for a general support for our direction of travel in terms of the resequencing. Some of the SAC members have certainly expressed appreciation for us to, the resequencing of taking a step back and allowing us, the board, to have more time to deliberate on the appropriate way forward in June next year. Some SAC members have also recognized the benefit of a continuing engagement with our stakeholders on these IESBA draft principles or viewpoints, particularly post-September, when we take these viewpoints out to the market and speak to some of our stakeholders. We've also received a number of comments and I guess questions also on the framework itself, and we've listed out some of the key points there. And of course, the project team will take these feedback into consideration as we continue to develop these IESBA draft principles. I'll just pick a couple of those. For instance, there was a comment about how firms will adopt this FCG framework. Was asking whether a similar approach to, say, corporate governance framework or corporate governance codes. And of course, that question goes to the very heart of the authority of the framework, whether it's going to be sitting inside the code or outside the code. Of course, there's also some comments about looking at the root causes of cases of unethical behavior and how that's connecting to to ethical culture. There's also some feedback on some of the elements like incentives and accountability, and there's a comment about the importance of ethics being embedded throughout the firm. And there's also some comments specifically from the investors' perspective, and this one's particularly on transparency about firms' lobbying activities. So all in all, I think we've got some good general support from the SAG in terms of our proposed way forward. And of course, next year we will continue in our first meeting in Q2 next year, 2026, which is the next SAC meeting. We'll continue to engage them to get some strategic input from them. So at this point, before I get into the IESB coordination update, I just want to quickly perhaps pass back to Gabriela to see if she wants to add anything on the IOSCO meeting or the SAC meeting, but also perhaps ask her to give a brief update on the recent PIOB meeting on this topic. Thanks, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yes, mostly, or not mostly, but on the meeting with IOSCO. Well, I'll say that the feedback from IOSCO, from the SAC, and from the PIOB was very supportive in all the cases. Some questions, as you mentioned, but it's important to note that there was some positive feedback on the fact that we clarified that we had not dropped or canceled the project, as it seemed to be the conviction of some people. So in the case of IOSCO, there was not only very clear support and incentive to move forward, but very good concrete suggestions about some specific areas of the project, namely in relation to the connections with ISQM1, which of course we will pick and consider. So from the feedback, as a general result or takeaway from these outreach meetings that we held since September, I think that the conclusion is that there is broad support for the project. Still some work to be done in two areas. On the one sense, make clear that we are absolutely clear about the direction, the objectives, and what exactly we want to do. The second one, that these connections with ISQM1 require some work also to make sure that we are absolutely clear about it. Now, let me just add something. There were questions. I think that probably in all of these meetings, even if I'm not absolutely sure, but in some of these meetings, there were questions about why did we decide to resequence. There is, from some stakeholder groups, the perception that maybe we have been subject to some pressure from some stakeholder groups, and that this is the reason why we have decided to resequence. So we have tried to be as clear as possible about the combination of reasons, which is really the case that led to this decision. Looking back, I think that we make really the right decision, and I think that there is agreement also from the stakeholders that we needed a little bit more time, a little bit more clarity, and a little bit more deep thinking around some of the topics. But there is this concern that there may be some some pressure on us to change a little bit the direction. So I think that's it, Jeff. But I think that the most important thing that I wanted to make clear is that there is support, and in some cases, very strong support for us to move forward.
Thank you, Gabriela, for that update. So we'll move to the IESB coordination update, and then we'll pause and see if board members have any feedback, comments, or questions. Again, as Gabriela have said, I think that there's some very consistent kind of feedback. It's about, I think stakeholders generally, I think it's good that we clarify the resequencing, that we haven't stopped the project, we haven't stopped what we're looking at in looking at the framework, but also the other questions that many stakeholders have is on the linkage with ISQM1. So I just want to give you a brief update on what we've been doing in terms of our coordination efforts with IESB. So the first one is Ken and I provided an update on this project at their September board meeting. So we gave them an update in terms of our board's discussion, the approach to the viewpoints, the discussions on the draft viewpoints, and amongst other things. Basically, I suppose there are three key points from the feedback that we could take away. The first one is, again, similar to this board's question back in September, is they want to see they're asking about the purposes and intent of these IESBA viewpoints. And you might recall in the September board meeting, we had received similar feedback from the board, and the board has recommended and asked the project team to develop a paper or material and explaining, in a clearer way, the purposes and intent of the IESBA viewpoints, which is, of course, what we have done. And we'll discuss the contextual piece in just a minute. The second point, no surprise, of course, is they are keen to see the linkage between the FCG elements or the FCG framework with ISQM1. There is an understanding, of course, FCG, firm culture governance, is an IESBA project and is within our remit. But of course, from IAASB's perspective, they're keen to see how the FCG elements connect with ISQM1, what are the similarities or differences, and how they really relate to each other. And of course, and I'll just explain in a minute what we're doing in that regard. The third point from the meeting, essentially, they've also asked if we have spoken with firm leadership who have been involved in implementing ISQM1 in their firms. And of course, we have been, in having engagement with firm leaderships, larger firms and smaller firms as well. And next week, we will be having a deep dive session with the Forum of Firms in Madrid, and Gabriela, Luigi, and Ken will attend that meeting and provide another update and also some of the discussions that we're having today on this project. And of course, next year, we will be bringing these draft principles or the viewpoints to discuss amongst other stakeholders, the GPPC firm leadership as well. So in terms of the preliminary discussions on the linkage with ISQM1 in terms of how we're going to approach this. And as I mentioned, of course, this is not just a question from IAASB, and other stakeholders have identified that as well. So certainly as a board and as a project team, we understand, and even in the September board meeting, this is something that had been raised by our own board members as well. And so the project team have been working closely with our IAASB colleagues. And in our meetings with them, again, we have just as contextual information for them, we've again re-explained the meaning of the resequencing. So to make sure that we are all on the same page, us and also IAASB as well. We've also talked a bit about how to approach the linkage between the FCG elements and of course ISQM1. So we've had the project team have discussed this with our project advisors, China and Rich, and also Gabriela and Ken as well. So we will be developing some draft material for the board's consideration in December. And so right now we're just looking at how to present this information to be able to give some clarity to stakeholders and ourselves, in terms of what that linkage is. We'll be looking at how to present information about the differences between ISQM1 and the FCG elements, particularly in the objectives and scope. Even though that, if you're familiar with ISQM1, there are some terms and themes that, we share some of those similar terms and themes. So we're looking at how best to present that linkage information, and we will certainly develop the draft material for your deliberation in December. So before I pass back to Gabriela to see if the boards have any question or comments, I just want to see if Ken has anything to add about the IAASB coordination, particularly our meeting with them back in September. Thanks, Ken.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff. I think you've largely covered the interactions we've had during that session with Greg Shalom, IAASB board member, Misha Peters, his technical advisor, and Jasper van den Hout, the IAASB director, tracking this project. I think on the linkage with ISQM1, we had some exchanges of thoughts, and they had questions as to how we might be thinking of approaching the articulation of the linkages and so forth. in particular at what level, for example, we were envisaging our analysis to go, whether we'd keep it at a high level or whether we'd go down, for example, to the level of specific paragraphs or specific requirements in SQM1. They had a suggestion to try to align or avoid at least any differences in terminology with ISQM1, because from their perspective, of course, they are wanting to avoid unnecessary divergences in wording. If on the two sides, on the two boards, the intent is the same. So that is something that's the project team will take on board as it goes forward with regard to the further refinement to the draft principles. Essentially, where they were coming from is they were looking at the set of draft principles from the perspective of the firms which would have implemented ISQM1, and they really wanted to make sure they fully understood, and or clearly on the firm's perspectives as well, that there will be clear understanding as to what is new relative to ISQM1. And firms have invested a lot of time and resources implementing the quality management standard, and having that clarity from that perspective is very, very important as far as I see it. So that is something that we are very mindful of, and already yesterday, the project team had a discussion with the board advisors on developing the linkages. There's already been a good level of effort that's been put into working on that linkage. We've identified a number of areas or aspects that can be further developed, and the expectation from the project team is that there will be a draft articulation of those linkages for presentation to the board in December. So that's all I would add at this point. This is work in progress, and we're going to be working closely with the colleagues on IEESB to make sure that there is clarity and there is understanding and there is commonality of at least the thinking in terms of how we're approaching the linkages. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Ken. Gabrielle, perhaps I'll pass it back to you to see if any board members have any comments.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And before I open the floor for discussion, let me just add that I forgot to mention that while we were in Tokyo for the IOSCO meeting, we had also had the opportunity to have meetings with not only with the JICPA, with the local PAO, but also with other stakeholders with whom we had the opportunity to speak. Of course, FCG's top is very high on their considerations about our work. We also received some feedback from JICPA and other stakeholders. But the questions are and the approach is relatively consistent. In Japan, there was a specific concern, which is about the fact that they have a governance code for audit firms, and they are concerned about possible contradictions, overlaps, or whatever. Of course, this will be taken into consideration, but it was another opportunity to have very good discussions on this topic, which again was very prominent in their questions and their willingness to discuss with us. So thank you very much, Jeff. And with this, I will open the floor for questions, comments, whatever the board members want to share at this point. Please raise your hands, and I'll try to make my best to see who wants to speak. For the time being, I'm not seeing anyone, but maybe let me check. Yeah, Nancy.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. For those it's the middle of the night, my apologies. I want to compliment the staff on this interaction with all of the stakeholders. I think this has been really, really helpful, and it's also provided me with a lot of clarity about our direction of travel here. So thank you for all of that. I did want to particularly focus on the interaction or the collaboration with IEESB over ISQM1. Again, my compliments. I think we are going in the right direction in that. I continue to get a lot of questions, if not concerns expressed about that interoperability with ISQN1. I mean, even as recently as yesterday, having conversations about this. So I think having a document that will address these things that we have worked jointly with IEESB in creating will be incredibly helpful. So I just want to encourage that and appreciate that there's probably a lot of challenges to this. Ken, I think your comment about the level of granularity, I think, is probably a pretty big challenge as to where is the sweet spot there. But at the same time, I think that this is critically important that we get something out there to answer the questions that I think have been bubbling up since almost the start of this project. The other minor suggestion that I might make is that we've got the contextual document that we'll be discussing later in this meeting. I think that there's probably some value in that contextual document once we move forward with the ISQM1 document, is that there's a linkage there between the two so that those folks that have interest in that, either they are clearly can understand there's another document and can go to that, or we embed it within that contextual document at some point. But I think having an understanding by a user that there is related information, I think would be especially useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts? Well, Jeff, I don't see anyone.
Thank you, Gabriela. Perhaps I'll just a quick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gabriela. Just a quick reaction to Nancy's feedback. Thank you again for your feedback. That certainly is really helpful to better hear what's, from a firm's perspective, the kind of questions that perhaps you might be getting. And of course, that is very much the intention of these material that we're developing in terms of the connectivity with ISQN1 to answer those questions and to the satisfaction of this board and certainly IESB and be able to give that sufficient clarity. In terms of the contextual document, I think you've raised a really good point. So we will look at certainly after this meeting to whether to, like you said, to link it with the ISQN1 material, or perhaps we'll have some brief material. We could do both, of course, to have some brief material that allows people to understand, that we haven't forgotten ISQN1, and that is an important piece of the puzzle as well. So thank you for that, Nancy. So with that, we will go on to the next bit of the presentation. Really is the meat of the discussion, and Laura and Joanne will lead you through certainly will do the presentation. So we are going to look at, like I said, the three pieces of documents. The first one is the contextual piece, the second one is the overarching piece, and then the third one is the revised draft principle, or the revised IESBA viewpoints on previously called rewards, but now is incentives and disincentives. So with that, I'm going to pass to Joanne to first present the document, the contextual piece. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, Jeff. So Gabriela and Jeff spoke to many of these points. I don't want to repeat too much here before we hear the board member questions and comments. The intent of this draft contextual piece, which you'll find in agenda item 1A, is to explain and clarify the context and purpose of the viewpoints or draft principles, which, like Jeff mentioned, is something we heard during the IEESB September board meeting, as well as from the IESBA September board meeting as well. This paper is split into several sections. The first aims to provide the background of the FCG project and the draft principles. The second section aims to lay out the resequencing of the work streams, including the reasoning behind the decision to resequence, which includes the combination of reasons that Gabriela spoke to before, what resequencing means, and clarification about what it does not mean. That resequencing did not mean that the standard setting workstream was abandoned. And the third section aims to walk through how we're intending to use these draft principles, that they're an instrument to use as a basis for further discussion with stakeholders in the first half of 2026. And then with this stakeholder input on these draft principles, we're anticipating that by June of 2026, the board will be in a better position to assess the approach to the FCG framework. And Jeff was laying out the pieces that we'll be presenting today. A quick note that the topics like the importance of ethical culture, the connectivity between the 8 FCG elements is in agenda item 1B, the overarching piece, which Laura will speak more to in the next slide. So we're asking for the board to share their views around whether this paper clearly explains the background and reasons for the resequencing, as well as the nature and purpose of the draft FCG principles. And before I hand it off to Gabriella to see if there's any questions, I'd like to see if maybe Jeff, Ken, Rich, Chana have anything else they'd like to add. Thank you.
Nothing from me, Joanne. Thank you.
Perhaps as a quick point, given the time restriction, of course, we would love to take any editorial feedback, but perhaps you can send those to us afterwards. If we can perhaps during this meeting get your substantive comments, that would be fantastic. But don't have anything to add. Thank you, Joanne. So back to you, Gabriella.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any questions or comments on this draft contextual piece from Joanne's presentation, but also from the arising from the document that you have seen? Well, Tomoyo, please.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you for the hard work for preparing this contextual piece. Hi, nice to see you all today. First, I think in perception, I think it seems like a good idea to issue a principle for this farm culture and governance. When I joined the IESBA meeting, IESBA C1 meeting with Gabriela, one impressive comment from Gabriela is that the current code is articulate what the individual have to do for ethics and independence, i.e., what John and Mary should do. So there should be something that are more overall kind of documents that articulates what the firm or the group as a whole have to do. So in that context, the preparing a principle sounds like a good approach. But I think we need to more clarify what is the difference between principle and the code. So this contextual piece, I think, explains well about the background, and but it looks like it suddenly goes to the a conclusion to prepare a principle. So I think we need more that to show where the principle is something above the code, or we need to discuss whether this needs to be, whether it's inside the code or outside the code. But before issuing this piece, I think we need to have a conclusion on where to place this principle. Otherwise, if the stakeholders not knowing all this discussion might feel that this contextual piece might be abrupt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Tomoyo, and thank you for reminding us about that part of the comments of IOSCO, which was really interesting. That conclusion that the code is focused on individual behavior, but it's clear that we need more at the firm level. So with respect to your comment on we need to decide where this framework and these principles will be located, yes, of course, but we will probably only be able to take that decision, I would say, once we have more certainty, clarity, etc., about the viewpoints, about the principles, and that we have tested a little bit. Because the idea is really to go out and see what is necessary, if some of these topics and these elements should be developed into standards, or if we can treat them in a different way. It can happen that part of them will be one thing and others will be another thing. So making that decision up front would probably be a little bit risky. Because we might, as we go and as we work, come to the conclusion that it should be something different. So this will be part of the decisions that we will be making, of course, as soon as possible, but not too soon, to make sure that the decision about is it in the code, is it outside the code, what is it, is based on full information, reflection, and testing with the ones that we'll be adopting. But thank you very much, Tomai. Very, very important to listen to these suggestions and to remind us that this is going to be an important decision to be made, also for the sake of clarity of stakeholders. Thank you. Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriela. Upon reading the documentation prepared for today's meeting, and also by listening how these matters are presented, it seems to me that there is a change in the terminology and in the meaning compared with what has been discussed in September. The objective of what we discussed in September was, I'm mentioning what it is written somewhere, to help firms understand how the principle in the viewpoint can be applicable in the firms. These also took into account that stakeholder has expressed different views, including some opposition to the standard setting. Furthermore, it was established that a decision on whether and how to proceed with the developing a firm culture and governance would only be taken, as already said today, in June 2026. However, I think that the contextual document and also the way the matter is dealt today highlight this change in terminology. We pass from principle in the viewpoint to a draft principle on the firm culture and governance element, and the intention to develop this principle by December, with the intent to move from viewpoint to draft principle. Again, I'm mentioning what it is written in the contextual document. Again, with the sole decision remaining whether to include them in the code or not, as it has been already mentioned in the previous comments. So basically, the viewpoints are authoritative material as it was intended at the beginning, whereas the principle of firm culture and governance, especially if they are used to inform the code, carry much greater weight. They are binding and must be applied. So it is completely different. I think that the document should be clear which is the context and which is the purpose. Is to set principle for the viewpoints, or is it to set draft principle of the firm culture and governance that sooner or later, after the testing, after the engagement with stakeholder, will be within or outside the code, depending on a decision of the board? Because it seems to me that we are really anticipating a lot what had been defined at the very beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. Amarjit.
Thank you, Gabriela. So I am broadly okay with this paper. Just a couple of points. By the way, I welcome this elevation to draft principles from the IESBA viewpoints. I thought, as I mentioned in the last meeting, I thought when we call it viewpoint, it's a very weak positioning. So, I welcome this. So I thought we could have a little more clarity on the prioritization. I read the paper. So maybe it's a drafting issue, not a substantive issue. So if you read section 2 of the paper, that gives a fair sense of resequencing where we are prioritizing NAM over development of the principles. But when you read section 3, the focus seems to be shifting back on developing principles, which is again fine. But I think in our mind, we should be clear, are we moving on two tracks simultaneously, or we are positioning one after another? If we are positioning one after another, then which one is the first which we are going to prioritize? Another comment I had was on the scope of NAM. Again, it's a matter of detail. Para 14 refers to that the project team will continue working on the development of NAM. So the point is, will it be based on the draft principles, or will it also integrate the provisions which are already form-specific provisions which are already available in the code? So that clarity is not there. Also, the clarity on timelines and milestones, but that I think, given the current scenario, we can live with that. This will evolve over time with, with the engagement with the, as a result of engagement with the stakeholders. So that is fine. That I don't worry much about. Last point, that is just a suggestion. In para 4 of the paper, where we are talking about the background, and it's an old point, it talks about adherence to the highest ethical standards across the service lines. That is a strategic value proposition. That's how we put it there, which I quite like. And my suggestion would be that we can pick this point, that strategic value addition, value proposition, that we can emphasize in all our communication with stakeholders when we talk to them on this subject. So point is, can we manage the perception around this? So these standards, as and when they develop, so I would probably like to position it as a value add rather than a compliance obligation. Moment you say compliance obligation, you run into a different sort of a debate. Whereas if you position it as a value add, you are talking something else. I'll just pause with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amajit. Jeff and project team, I will probably collect 1 or 2 more questions and then give you the floor to respond, and to anyone who wants to react.
Sure.
Sadia, please.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm so glad I came after the first 2 speakers because it kind of covered some of the angles. But I think I need to acknowledge that I'm thankful for this call. This call helps us because there are certain feedback items that kind of kept us abreast on what has happened between the last meeting and our December meeting, but also just explaining it versus what we were reading kind of linked to some things that might not have been identified in the paper. So I had more concerns, but after I heard Gabriella speak about the future of this project, I'm kind of understanding why we'd be saying these things. This is probably the shortest document that IESBA has written, understandably so, but at the same time, there might be a communication gap because we have gone from using some new terminologies and then also not really. At this time, it's very difficult to specify certain things, but at the same time, people are used to our project development and they're looking to see what those beacons or those markers are. So the first one was I was also looking for milestones, but I think that the only milestone we can set at the moment is the June milestone. That is when we will make a determination. The other thing that we're in a new space because we are saying that we are going to develop something. We're not sure what we're going to develop. And that might, and I'm sorry to do this, Jeff, but in paragraph 10, that's where it comes up where we say continuing to explore the best approach to the FCG framework. Some people are already immediately saying that these are amendments to the code and they're not getting the context as we describing it, that this might be aspirational, it might be value add, it might be something that it doesn't sit within the body of the code because of the way we've described this approach in the project proposal previously. So that might be one of the communication items you might want to think about so that we don't have any gaps in what we're intending to do versus what we're intending to do, what we now intend to do, and what we're going to decide still in June. The other one hasn't been mentioned before, but I did think that there was an opportunity in paragraph 17. It says it's primarily aimed at senior leadership of firms, but we don't say about the secondary or other people that might be affected by it. And there might be a paragraph of how other users would be using it, because then it might be said only these people need to be engaged, and a whole lot of other people within the firm wouldn't feel like they have to engage in this document. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadia. Hector?
Thank you, Chair. And very briefly, I wanted to say some of the things that Sadia mentioned. If we call them draft principles, and I think most people would assume they are requirements or mandatory in a certain way, which I'm not opposed to be honest with you. But this expectation or communication thing, it's important so that when we say in June we will be evaluating what we do with them, people would assume that it would be standard setting. On the other side, even if it's not in the document, we have been hearing here as well this idea of field testing. Usually you field test something that is a requirement, not just a recommendation. So if we are saying that we're going to field test something, people would assume it's going to be mandatory. So I think the communication is very clear in that sense. And if this is creating a problem, my worry is, or my suggestion is, maybe we don't need to field test any of this, because they have been applied, all of those principles, one way or another by different firms around the world. We just need to document what they have been doing. There is no need to field test principles that are common governance principles that are applied all over the world. So we just need to find case studies and show how they work. And then we save this field testing phase. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Rich, please.
Yes, thank you, and hello to all. Briefly, as I've reflected on the final documents and the discussion from September, and I know we have headed towards calling these principles, I think perhaps we need to revisit the use of that word at this stage in the project, maybe for two reasons. One, maybe a little minor, but we have fundamental principles in the code, and they are foundational to the code and the conceptual framework. And I would not want to create some confusion as to whether what we're talking about in these papers represents something of equal standing to that, because we haven't decided that. And secondly, as we prepared these over time, and I reflected back on that, we took significant stakeholder input and we added that to the input and views the board members have provided, and are expressing what I see as characteristics of that make up the 8 elements. And maybe there's another word from characteristics. There could be a variety, but I'm a little concerned about jumping to principles at this point, given what we plan to do with this document, and that we haven't made we won't be till, or the board won't be till next June making a decision on that aspect of the project. And so I think that's maybe a bit embedded in a couple of the comments I heard from others, but I've just come at it from a slightly different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Mark.
Thank you. It's a really interesting discussion to listen to, and I'm left with sort of the view that there are 2 jobs to do, and the first of those jobs needs to be completed to allow the second one to take place. And what I mean by that is that in the contextual paper, it sets out the sort of direction of travel, the sort of decision points that we've passed, and it's helpful there as a sort of record of where thinking has gone. The problem that we have, the first job, is that through no fault of anyone here, this project has been interpreted in multiple different ways by multiple different people. And indeed, I was at the ICGN conference earlier this week in Milan. So I was loitering outside Luigi's office. And I was told by a number of different people what IESBA was intending to do with this project. And none of them were in any way right. And none of them reflect sort of the position where the board is. And I really think we need to spend some time in the run up to the next board meeting, and maybe even beyond that, to get control back of our own narrative. Because the problem is, it's quite damaging to this project to have a lot of uninformed speculation about what IESBA is intending to do, when we've been very clear that what IESBA does is subject to a board decision in June 2026. And the materials that have been prepared for the meeting today are helpful in moving our thinking forward about how we need to get control of our own narrative back. But I think we need to do some more work to do that, and to have, to set out what we really want, because at the moment there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's because people are saying this is what IESBA is going to do, and it's more because that's what they would like to think IESBA is going to do than anything else.
Thanks, Mark. That's very helpful. So I don't see anyone for the time being wanting to speak. Thank you very much for these very substantive and thoughtful contributions. I'm going to hand over to the project team for your reactions and responses.
Okay. Thank you, Gabriella. I'll take a step at it first, and I'll invite others from the project team and the board advisors to jump in perhaps afterwards. Look, I think in terms of, certainly we've heard a few comments about potential communication gap and even the use. I think all the comments are all tied together really. So it's great in that sense. In terms of the communication gap, or indeed including perhaps we have now moved from the title IESBA viewpoints to IESBA draft principles, which may create a slightly wrong perception that we are already intending that these principles will turn into standards in the code, which of course is not the what this board is intending to do, as we have always intended, as Gabriella had very clearly explained at the start of this meeting, that certainly is on, and also in the contextual piece that is on, and as we've heard earlier, the real milestone is in June next year, when this board come back together to look at the approach to the FCG framework, and also in terms of the authority of this framework, that is in principle, whether it's in the code or outside the code. But certainly we hear the feedback, for instance, of like from Rich, in terms of the use of the word principle, irrespective of our, or draft principles, irrespective of our intention, that may create some confusion there. And Hector, thank you for your, and also thank you everyone for your feedback in terms of some of the changes that you've identified, and how we might be able to clarify our language a bit better to make it even clearer. And Hector, thank you for your feedback in terms of the field test, of course. And the board, of course, decided in September at this stage we will put that on hold until we stabilize these viewpoints or principles first, and certainly take your view that if you know as we go out into the market next year with these viewpoints, and if the firms are demonstrated they're doing some of these, and maybe you know, where we will look at again whether there's a need for field tests. But certainly you've mentioned about case studies or good practices, and certainly that's something that we will be doing anyway in Q1 and Q2 irrespective. So thank you for bringing that up. And Mark, I think your comments, I guess, are lined up with the other board members' comments about as well about clarity, but more importantly about making sure that we take back control of our narrative, what this project has been doing and is intending to do, and where we're heading and where we got to, rather than a whole lot of different views. But of course, you know, this as part of that communications, as part of that taking back the narrative, this contextual piece is one of the things, one of the tools that we want to use. But as you've mentioned, that you know, then you know, probably more work that needs to be done, and we of course the project team is working with Rui on the communication side to make sure we you know, can bring that clarity to our stakeholders. So there is you know, everyone understands what we are intending to do with these viewpoints and we're intending to take them when we get to June 2025. But certainly, thank you very much for the feedback on the contextual piece. And if you have any additional comments, or whether more substantive or just editorials, please send them through to the project team, and we will look at them and certainly bring a revised version in December. But we'll take into consideration some of the other feedback as well, and look at what else we need to do in terms of bringing back that narrative, to bring that clarity to our stakeholders. So Gabriela, if that's okay with you, we'll move on to the next piece.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
please go.
Yes, I was just going to make sure that the board members did not want to react to these comments that we heard, because I think that we have very substantial and not necessarily completely aligned comments. So I think that we need to make sure what we will take from these good comments. Chana, please.
Yeah, I first have a question for Mark. Mark, what's the second job? First job is the you know, clarifying the communication. You said we have two jobs to do.
Well, I think the second one is then obviously sort of landing the project in the right place for June 2026. But I think that would be made far more difficult without actually getting control of our own narrative back, because we'll be continually being second guessed by everyone else. Okay, thanks, Mark. So a couple of points on what Tomoyo said about individual behavior. The code has things for firms to do, so particularly in the independence area. So I wouldn't say that the code is all about individual behavior, because it has obligations on the firms as well. In terms of what Luigi said, I'm not sure that, I mean, except for in some cases we have, you know, the viewpoints as principles, and we have an issue over that, as Rich also touched on. I'm not sure we have really changed that lot, Luigi, from where we were in September. I mean, the contextual piece just sort of documents, you know, what has happened, the background, the resequencing. And the only part that I sort of see is in paragraphs 13 and 14. Is that what concerned you?
Yes, Chana, it is really indicating a change of the terminology, and it seems a change of directions, where we are not interested anymore in, or the project team is not interested anymore in developing viewpoint that include principles, or it is principle-based to be shared with the stakeholder, but seems to be more worried to create draft principle of the firm culture and governance. This is what it is written there, and it is the terminology I heard during the meeting today.
Yeah, and is it is it you would be more comfortable that if we continue as viewpoints until June 2026?
I think that we need to be very clear on what we are doing now. Are we really proposing the opinion of the IESBA, the viewpoint, the recommendation, I don't know how to call, or are we changing and then going into defining the framework or the principle of the framework, and therefore going on versus, let's say, anticipating certain decisions that should be taken in June, because June will not be only to decide whether to do something in the code or outside the code, but would probably be also defining what to do. And it seems to me that we are anticipating a lot this phase.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Ken sort of talked about it as fundamental truths or something at one stage. I mean, these are things that we have heard after going through the whole working group report and the stakeholders. I mean, the 8 areas that have been identified, it was pretty consistent through the global stakeholder outreach. And it became quite clear quite early on, and it remained consistent right throughout. So, I mean, we can find another word rather than principles. But I think the areas are sort of pretty clear and unlikely to change. Ken, you want to come in? What happened to Ken? Did you?
I don't know. I was looking for him. No, Ken, you wanted to speak. Sorry. You're on mute, Ken.
I'm sorry, I have 20 buttons on my screen, so I'm just trying to figure out which one is which. So thank you very much, Chana and Gabriela. So what I'm taking from this discussion is that the board still would like to be 100% clear on the stage of the process we're at and how we're intending to present what we've up until now, or what at least up until September, have been characterizing as viewpoints. The contextual piece is to Mark's comment is indeed intended to enable the board to essentially grab hold and control the narrative. And that contextual piece is intended to be used to help with the communications as to what the board's intent is, how the board is undertaking the process of socializing the draft viewpoints as we have them, or the draft principles, where depending on where the board would feel comfortable being at this point, and really messaging that intent to stakeholders. So coming out of the board meeting in December, that contextual piece will be an integral part of what the board will be using together with the other 8 elements and the key messages in those 8 elements as a basis for further engagement with stakeholders. So that is really the intent of the contextual piece. We have received different comments from board members, and we can certainly consider those at the project team level in terms of whatever refinement needs to be done. But it seems to me the critical decision that needs to be made by the board at this point is to what extent should the board go beyond what the board had characterized as viewpoints and was comfortable with in September, and essentially moving towards draft principles. And I'm just wondering whether it would be better at this point of the process to just stay with draft principles, but really messaging that these are really principles based, and use the period of the stakeholder engagement to test out those principles based viewpoints and understanding and seeing what stakeholders' reactions would be. if those were to be accepted as essentially principles of culture, principles, whatever we want to call them, but principles of fundamental elements of a firm culture and governance framework. And we have all the 8 elements, but essentially the question, the discussion with stakeholders is going to be, to what extent do you believe that those essential viewpoints, which largely reflect and incorporate the broad consensus we've heard from the roundtables and from the extensive outreach that's been undertaken, to what extent do you believe those essentially represent principles that should stand the test of time? So that is potentially a way to approach it, without, to address some of the concerns that we're hearing now, without in effect giving an indication that the board has already prejudged a decision in June, without the benefit of further stakeholder input. So that is a question that I think we are considering at this point, and it would be good to have a sense from the board as to the direction to go, because that is what the project team will take on board in turning around the contextual piece into the next iteration and presenting that to the board in December.
Thank you, Ken. Amarjit, please.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriela. So, just to reiterate, so it's the question of, how do you want to position this almost 2 years work, which IESBA project team has been doing. If you position it as viewpoints, it is a very weak positioning even for the purpose of engaging with the stakeholders. If you don't want to call it, we are calling it draft principles, we are not calling it principles. If there is a strong resistance to usage of draft principles, can we look for some middle path? Maybe we call it recommendations, if it is more acceptable to everyone. Also, having spent so much time on this, we should see, June 2026 will not have a miracle, we have to know the direction of travel. So we have to make up our mind now and see where we are heading forward. So I guess the middle path could be recommendations or some other term, but I think we should position it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amarjit. Mark, please.
So just really by way of a sort of further sort of example of the point I was trying to make. And I do think, Ken, that what you said there sort of made sense in terms of what we should be looking at. But two points. Firstly, and this is the reason that getting the grip of the narrative is so difficult. We use a term like viewpoint. Viewpoint means different things to different people. And so therefore, the problem is everyone is using a term, but they're all thinking there's something different from it. And what we need to do is we need to get a more common understanding of what it is we're intending to achieve, do, deliver. And the same sort of applies. And I was really struck when we were going through the bit about close working with the IEESB. We're talking about quality management. And again, some people think about quality management in a very narrow way. So it's focused on what do you need to deliver quality in the context of an audit business. Actually, some people think about quality management in a very broad context, because firms may be thinking about culture and other related things as part of their wider quality management expectation. So I think the difficulty is that we're using terms and everyone's using the same terms, but they're all understanding something different by it. And that's the point that I'm really sort of keen that we try and get across, to sort of narrow that gap. So when we talk about something, everyone is in the same place.
Thank you, Mark. Very helpful. Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that the document as it represents the most important communication piece that we are preparing, should be very clear on what we are intending here. If we are intending, as I understood, figuring out what we believe are the principle or whatever other terminology we select that we believe are to be considered, call it viewpoints and so on, we should be very, very clear in explaining what it is. And if the intention is to ask the stakeholders whether these may become something more, call it draft principle of the firm culture and governance, the question should be embedded into this contextual piece, it should be very clear. I'm not really in favor to leave the matter in a way which is not clear how we are dealing with this matter, how we pass from what had been discussed in September to this document, which, as I mentioned before, seems to be a different thing. It could just seem, it could be the same thing described in a different way, but by reading it, by hearing the discussion here, I find it quite different. And I think different in a way that I don't like very much, because in the middle, there was not the steps that we agreed in September with the stakeholders.
Thank you, Luigi. Ken, please. Ken, you're on mute.
Oh, I was going to suggest David come before me, Gabriela. David, go ahead.
Thank
Yes,
you, Ken. I
David,
think
sorry.
Gabriella's on mute now.
Yeah, sorry.
We've all got 20 buttons, it seems. I would say, as I'm listening to the conversation and having reflected on September and post, to be honest, I think we just need to continue to make progress. I think the naming convention is something that is going to evolve. I think there are, different views on what the naming convention should be. I would suggest in the short term that we use a bit more consistency with what was agreed in September, just so we don't have these kinds of confusing thoughts around, are we evolving, are we changing? When I don't necessarily get the sense that we are, but we're using words differently, and hence to Mark's point, and I agree with him, same words mean different things to different people. So the more we can stick with what we've agreed on, and perhaps to Luigi's point, one of the suggestions that might be helpful is give a little bit of an introductory 1 or 2 sentences to the document that explains where it sits in the grand scheme of what we're thinking. But again, I think to the point that was raised a little bit earlier around the importance of communication, and I absolutely agree with that, we could explain perhaps a little more clearly how some of these naming conventions might evolve, and ultimately we give a bit more clarity, and to Mark's point, take a little bit back the narrative so that we can describe it, because I think there are still some moving parts. And I think the point that Gabriela made a little bit earlier as well around, we don't want to put ourselves into a box too early, because we don't know where everything is going to land today, right? We've got about 8 more months before we have a final presentation to the board. So somehow I think on the communication, the more we can stick with consistency, but also explain with some caveats in our communication that some of these naming conventions may evolve. And I think the points around, and I think Hector was the one that raised this a little bit earlier, I have the same question as him. What do we mean exactly by field testing? Because principles, I'm not sure exactly how we would test principles, if I'm really honest. I can understand how we test a process, and I can understand how we test a framework in terms of the application of the framework. So I think perhaps a little bit more color in our communication around what it means in practice might also go a long way to reducing some of the confusion. So I think some of the comments made, I can absolutely understand where the board members are coming from, because I share some of them. So maybe it would be helpful, Ken, if we can work with the communications team a little bit more, just to provide more clarity, but not create a box that doesn't allow us to evolve this over the next 8 months, which I think will naturally happen, because as we get feedback and we do outreach, there'll naturally be some suggestions and some feedback that will show that evolutionary process as well. So I don't know if that's helpful, just to try to tie a little bit together what everybody has said, because I don't see this as a disaster, if I'm honest. I actually see this quite clearly, and I see that there's an intent to continue on the path. I think we're tripping up a little bit over the evolution of words and the fact that they mean different things to different people, and I totally agree with that sentiment. So I just wanted to share those views, hopefully with some views them being helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I think it's not a disaster too, but I'll get back to your comments. Thank you very much. Ken, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Gabrielle. I was going down along the lines that David has articulated, and my suggestion would be a bit along the lines also that, as Reggie has suggested, which is a bit to bridge a bit of the gap, which or maybe there's been a bit of a step that's been skipped, which is that we have the 8 months ahead of 7, 8 months ahead of us to really socialize. If you want to stick with the terminology that we've used up until September, and even in some of the papers that have been tabled today, the term viewpoints. There's a bit of the evolution and the journey and the process where we are sort of pursuing, and one way to really try to bring that clarity to the document, the conceptual piece, and the board's intent is really to explain that what the board has done is precisely how it's explained in the conceptual piece, which is to analyze all the extensive feedback the board has collected through the roundtables, etc., and to identify essentially the main areas and the main points of consensus across the 8 elements of the framework, and to articulate those areas of consensus, those points of consensus, as essentially IESBA viewpoints, which would incorporate IESBA's own reflections, and to use those viewpoints as a basis for engagement with stakeholders with a view to exploring whether those viewpoints or parts of them or aspects of them might be considered or might be accepted as essentially essential elements or essential principles of the different elements of the firm culture and governance framework. And that would be essentially the work that would need to be done over the first 2 quarters of next year. To what extent do stakeholders see those viewpoints as encapsulating the essence, the principles that people will accept as being absolutely the right thing to do, should absolutely be part of a firm culture and governance framework? And to what extent do they believe other viewpoints perhaps might not be quite at the level of the principles, but more perhaps as supporting constructs, or perhaps more kind of an operational element or dimension of one area of the framework. So that there is a bit of an articulation that can be added to the conceptual piece that would essentially explain a bit of that step or that bridge that we need to cross before we get to June, with some recommendations from the project team as to what the board might want to consider.
Thank you very much, Ken. Vanya, sorry, Vanya. You're on mute, Vanya. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Too many systems. I have to select the micro, sorry. I'm fully supportive of the proposal from the staff about his sequencing and drafting and so on. But I'd also like to endorse David's comments. I think we need better communication Because if you are not able to be comfortable with terminology being used among us, that might be causing many problems among those who are not as familiar as we are with the project. So I think we must have better communication, not only for the outside, but including among us in the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanya. So at this point, I don't see anyone else. Let me just say a few words after this excellent discussion. I think that we had thank you very much for your comments, very good comments, and I think that the conclusion is relatively easy. We need to do a better job in terms of communicating what we want to do and what we are doing. The words are a little bit a trap here because, as Sadia was saying, people are used to a certain terminology, which means a very objective and clear thing. And once we go out of that space, words can be misleading, and we need to be very careful about the terminology and about the clarity of the message. So we got, I think, and we will take away this recommendation from the board, from all the board members who spoke, to clarify not only what we are speaking about, the viewpoints, draft principles, what's the best way of referring to them, but also clarification about the direction of travel and where we want to go, what's the process and what's the objective. If I were to summarize, I think it's about this. But it's always important to highlight that communications cannot do magics if we are not ourselves clear about things. So they can, but then it will be communications leading the work and not, the other thing. So I see these things going very closely and integratedly. And I think that this conversation is helpful also because it brings the need for us all to have more clear exactly what we are to do. I think that we have that clear, and I try to be clear at the start of my in my initial notes, because it's clear that there is confusion in the market, that there are misunderstandings, that there are different interpretations, and etc. That was already obvious. That's why this contextual piece was developed to try to address these confusions, and I think it's already a slightly innovative way of dealing things and of recognizing that we need to do more. But of course, there are additional challenges, and one thing that we certainly don't want is to mislead stakeholders. We want to be clear. This is a commitment that we have as a board and as an ethics board, mostly after starting working in this framework of the SMART framework and etc. Clarity is absolutely necessary. So I think that the message is also very clear from the board members about the need to progress from here to December to have more clarity. Now, a few things that I picked from your comments and which were really, really good. This idea that someone mentioned that there will be no miracle in June. We need to work for something in June to happen, for us to make a decision based on work that has to progress. So it's not as if we had stopped somewhere in June or in September and we would wait for something to happen in June. There is work to be done. And I think that this evolution, if I may say so, even if maybe some of you have not understood it like that, from the viewpoints to draft principles is part of that progress that we need to make. Now, maybe we need to make much more clear that speaking about draft principles does not mean that we are going to have 8 standards based on these 8 elements. The options are open, and the draft principles can mean that these principles will be used in a different way, in a different format, etc. So I think but it's necessary to start evolving into something more structure and understandable and concrete for that decision to be made in June. So this is a little bit the story of the chicken and the egg. Where do we start? And we don't want to go in circles. We really want to progress, but to progress with clarity, internal clarity, and external proper communication. So thank you very much. I think this was an amazing discussion, and the question is, what are we going to do with these comments? But I think that it's going to be very, very important to have this feedback in mind. There are slightly different approaches with respect to the terminology. I think that all in all, the board members are in agreement about what's more important, and it's the direction of travel and how we connect and maintain a clear dialogue and a meaningful dialogue with stakeholders. So thank you, and with this, I'm going to hand over back to the project team or to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Gabriela. And certainly very conscious of time, and that had been a very good discussion already. So I'm going to pass immediately to Laura, who's going to walk through the next two pieces. And apologies again that I'm going to have to step up soon to catch my flight. Thank you. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Jeff. So very quickly, another piece that we're tabling today for discussion by the board is what we're calling the draft overarching piece, which we also discussed in September as being the 9th viewpoint. And it basically explains the importance of having a strong ethical culture in a firm. And also it highlights the connectivity between the 8 FCG elements, how all of them are part of an ecosystem. And even though it mentions that there's the two of those elements, like ethical leadership and oversight and governance, they might sit at the top. The other 6 work together with those 2 elements to set up a whole ecosystem that helps building a strong ethical culture. So with not much further ado, I would perhaps just open the floor to comments.
Thank you, Laura. So comments from board members on this piece of work, the draft overarching piece. Amajit, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I have 2-3 specific comments. First of all, broadly, I'm okay with this connectivity which has been brought about in the 8 pieces. So first comment was on oversight and governance. So there we are saying, in the center of this piece, we're saying holding leadership accountable for their behavior. So we are singling out leadership for fixing the accountability. So whereas if you see under the para 6, accountability is talked more in terms of in broader terms across the firm, not just the leadership. So just a consistency issue. So I would suggest, if we can, instead of just saying holding leadership accountable for their behavior, we could reword the language to emphasize that it is accountability across the firm. So that is point 1. Point 2 is, this open discussion and challenge. This is the 4th bullet in para 6. The last line, frankly, I'm struggling to understand. I can see where you're coming from, but it looks like a bit of a stretch in terms of linking the peer consultation and critical thinking with the role of continuous learning through real-time on-the-job training and leadership's role modeling. So I'm struggling a bit to get clear about this. So perhaps you could reconsider rephrasing this piece. And last point is, no strong views about this, but the provision of independent input that we are placing as the other 6 elements, not the key pillar. So sometimes I feel independence is very important, and should it be a key pillar instead of a subsidiary pillar? But as I said, all the principles or the draft principles are important here. So it doesn't really matter much where you put it, but just think in terms of whether you want to take it a notch above the other principles. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amarjit. Tomoyo.
Thank you. So for this the overarching piece, my first impression was it looked quite a light touch than I expected, and I assume one reason is because well, we added this contextual piece. So I think this comes along with the contextual piece and covers the expectation. I think but I think the purpose of this document is to show the whole farm culture and governance framework. So maybe it's good to have more illustrative things in the in this paper rather than just words. Also, again, I think I understand we are still not there, but it's really important to clarify what the difference between ISQM1 and this FGG framework in this document, because that is one of the interests that the stakeholder have. So thank you.
Thank you, Tomoyo. Obichuku.
Thank you, and hello everyone. So I was glad, I was impressed when I read the principles and the overarching piece. I felt it was a good read, very summarized, a summary of what the FCG elements is about. But without repeating what everybody had said, I think that we have to agree exactly on what we want to do first. If we agree on a framework, then these principles are like key design principles that can be worked into a framework. So if you're using that approach and then looking at the overarching piece, ethical leadership and oversight and governance, it all gives us a sense of direction. But if at this point we have not agreed on whether it's a framework or we want to do a principle or we want to do now, we will keep on having back and forth on this. So I just want to say that the principles, the way it was written, what we just had, what was just circulated, that was a nice read. But putting it into a framework will make it wholesome. Because when I was reading it, I was just like thinking, okay, you can use it, make up a framework and all that. So my point is that we are one step towards our direction. But if we don't really agree at this point in October what that direction is, if you're not definite that we are doing a framework, which was the initial understanding in March, if I'm not mistaken, if you are not agreeing it's a framework, we might find ourselves in December and June still trying to agree on or come up with something we feel will be acceptable. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Obichuku. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I was really happy with this document because I think it's the most concisely written document using as much plain language as is possible. So I thought it did a good job at setting out in a very concise way what the expectations were. I do agree that I think the two areas of ethical leadership and oversight and governance, I do think they actually precede all of the others, because of the other six, you could debate how you would order them anyway. So I think to me, the fact that we've called out two, which frankly underpin the entire context of an ethical culture, I think are really important. I think to the point that's been raised as well, there actually might be a really good opportunity here to show these visually as well. If you think about something like a little bit of a message house of sorts, where you've got pillars that hold it up, and then on the roof, you've basically got the two key elements of ethical leadership, and oversight and governance perhaps sits underneath as the foundation for everything that's done. But I think you could show this quite visually in a way that shows them quite interconnected. That might be something that could be done perhaps as a different approach. As a different, okay, I'm not sure what's happening there, but as a different approach, but could reinforce, I think, the fact that they are all connected. But I have to say, kudos to the team for writing this so concisely. I was expecting something a lot more verbose, and I was very happy that we chose language that's more accessible and more simple. So well done.
Thank you, David. Chana, please.
Yeah, so on the diagram, I think for ISQM one also at a certain point there was a diagram. So we did discuss the diagram, David, in the project team as well. So there is a plan to come up with some sort of a diagram, but there was not enough time for this meeting. Just going back to one of Amarjit's points, like the provision of independent input, I could go either way, whether it goes up or down. The argument for putting it up is that in a lot of cases, the firms operate as partnerships and they don't get that external input. It has been sort of shown what happened in UK and Australia and so on, that that external viewpoint of somebody independent is actually quite useful. So that point, sort of, I'm a bit with Amarjit whether it should go up, because then it strengthens the governance. It sort of strengthens something that is a weak point in the traditional structure that predominantly operates around the world.
Thank you, Chana. Rania, please.
Thank you. So my comment is, I really like this document. My only suggestion would be the following. In item number 1, the fourth line reads, these ethical values are firmly embedded in the firm's organizational and governance structures and mechanisms, which I totally agree with, because it suggests that ethics are, or ethical values are institutionalized and they are embedded at the strategic level. But I think we also want to suggest or recommend that these ethical values also transcend or go down to a very granular level, which is all the processes and all the decision making, and to the fact that they also shape each and every decision that is made, no matter how strategic or no matter how operational. So I would add something in there to suggest that ethical values are embedded into the firm's organizational and governance structures and mechanisms, but also as well into all the processes, decision making. Give some examples, the fact that they should be shaping each and every decision, all assessments or evaluations. I think it's important to show that it should be really mainstreamed or across all types of decision making, no matter how strategic, no matter how granular or operational. The other thing is item number 3, when we talk about the following 8 FCG elements, I would recommend just a slight addition, which is the following key FCG elements, just to suggest that these are the main elements, but ethics should be really in each and every aspect of the business and decision making and each and every aspect of the the organizational hierarchy and infrastructure. So just to give that, I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that we want to reflect that ethical values should be definitely very importantly at a very high and strategic level, but they should cascade throughout the entire hierarchy and different levels of management and decision making. And that's what really makes ethics embedded into the culture and ethical culture, I would say. So just that slight addition or modification of wording, I would say, but otherwise everything in there, I think it's very well done. So thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Rich, please.
Thank you. I would just briefly, I would be a little cautious about elevating anything else upward to where we have ethical leadership and ONG, because those are so fundamental. But also, as it relates to independent input, we did receive extensive feedback globally from stakeholders of all sizes from the profession, particularly small and medium-sized firms, about their views on how valuable and when and if they need to get it. And I think the reason I wouldn't element is none of them seem to suggest on a day in and day out basis that would be of value as it relates to decisions made at an individual engagement level, such as whether to share confidential information or whether to fully explain the findings in a way that might be more negative to the organization that you're consulting on or something. So I think we should be a little cautious that we heard a lot of valuable input that puts it where it is and not necessarily at that same level as the others. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Nancy, please.
Thanks. Maybe just to add on a bit to Rich's comments. I view the first two, ethical leadership and oversight and governance, as being the foundation. Is without those, none of this really works. The rest of these elements, and I think it's so well described in this document, is working in an interconnected and mutual reinforcing way. By elevating any one of these above, I think there's a suggestion that's not part of the approach, is that interconnectivity. I heard many of the same things that Rich did, at least in the roundtable I was in, is that independent input is an element that's important. But I would say that open discussion and challenge was probably the element that I heard most emphasized as being really, really critical. So I think you start to get into a bit of a challenge by taking any of these remaining elements and saying they're more important than any of the others, because I think it's the sum of the parts is what's important here in the interconnectivity. So I would agree with Rich about expressing caution about elevating any of the items that are in paragraph 6 into paragraph 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Sadia, please.
So I really like that this paper was 3 pages. It was giving us an indication of an overview, which was the intention of the paper. Can we say more? Probably yes. Should we be saying more? No. I think that kind of approach will alleviate the need on how much detail to put in here. And if anything's going to complicate it, then we're going to have a communications issue because people will misunderstand or read too much into it. I was happy with the 2 that has been highlighted, and I think of it from a scalability point of view. The first 2 seems to be something that is easy to read the scalability. Anything else would seem that it needs a little bit cautious or would not easily be understood as why that would be there for all type of firms. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sadia. So I don't see any other comments. Laura, do you want to react? Laura or Jeff, I don't know exactly who is now leading, but I think it's Laura. Do you want to react to this, to what you heard?
Yes, please. Before we move on to the last paper, so just first of all, thank you very much for the support and the kind words for the paper and especially the length of the paper and the language used. We did try to keep it simple and easy to follow. Regarding the suggestions, the wording suggestions and the rephrasing suggestions, of course, we'll take that into consideration when we revise the paper for the December meeting. Just on the suggestion or on the fact that we have identified those two elements, ethical leadership and oversight and governance, sitting at the top, and the possibility of elevating any others, and the different views that we've heard. The thinking from the team when drafting the paper was, we understood it was very much consensual that those two elements do sit at the top, so that there's less controversy regarding those two. And once we start talking about the other six, then there are different perspectives. Some people think maybe it's independent inputs, and maybe it's open discussion and challenge, maybe it's something else. So there's less consensus on when we go into the other six. So that's why we kind of suggested having only those two, but still highlighting it's not a hierarchy. It's just there's a natural prominence of those two elements, but all 8 function as a whole, and there's no expendable elements or disposable elements. And regarding that comment on the relationship or the linkages with ISQM, as it was mentioned earlier in the meeting, we are working on a paper that will explain those linkages and the differences, and for the December meeting. And as I believe also Jeff mentioned at the time, we can consider how to refer back to that paper in this, either the contextual paper, probably more in the contextual paper, or this one, the overarching one. But yes, not ignoring that ISQM1 is a topic that keeps popping up in this discussion. So if it's okay, we'll move on to the last paper that was prepared for discussion in this meeting, which is the revised viewpoint/draft principles on incentives and disincentives. Again, not taking too much away from the discussion, and also being aware of time. Just a few notes. We did revise not only the content, but also the title of this viewpoint. It was previously called rewards. In light of the discussion that we had in September, we are suggesting now to use incentives and disincentives as the title. We also made a small edit on the title of the first section, which is no longer public interest considerations, but public interest rationale. And if the board agrees with this change, we will then make the same change for the other viewpoints. We took into consideration when revising the content of this viewpoint, of course, all the suggestions and comments that the board made in September, and yes, and you could see some the content was reviewed not only on the incentives section, but also on the disincentive section, which was we added a few more principles there. And so I would now open the floor to comments, and I will also share the paper in case board members want to make some specific suggestions in terms of the paragraphs.
Thank you very much, Laura. So let's wait a bit, but until we see the document on the screen. But I'll start collecting comments and suggestions from board members. Amajit, you're the front runner today.
Thank you. So I had some specific comments, and 2 or 3 actually. So one is on disincentive number 10, the para 10, if you want to just show it on the screen. So this is a new inclusion. This was probably not there last time at the time of September board. While I see the intention, but I was just thinking in terms of the practical implementation, when it comes to implementing this principle, so basically what this principle says is that hiring policies and procedures that enable a firm to avoid recruiting individuals with known records of unethical behavior. So known records of unethical behavior is what I'm struggling with. This is very context specific. This could mean different things. Somebody, for example, in the securities market, people settle their alleged violations without admission of guilt. So whether that is an unethical behavior or not, it is very difficult to determine. So I was just thinking, do you really need this? Or if you need this, can it be made a little more implementable? This is also not so high level. Your policies should embed the ethical side anyway. So do you really need to call it out here is a question to ask. So that was one. Second is something which was there in September board meeting, which is missing this time, is there was a mention about, and I have it here, about balancing expected ethical behavior and financial performance goals. So we had some discussion. I think Rania had made some comments about how do you balance the two, because ethics are not negotiable. So while we've deleted it this time, and we have some other language in para number 8, I think it's a very important issue. How do you see financial performance and ethics together? How do you integrate ethics into financial performance? That probably should figure somewhere. Either I would probably suggest have an explicit explicit point on that, because that is a dilemma which firms face every day, right? So I think we should deal with it in the best possible manner. And probably balancing was not the right language last time, but we could find the right way of dealing with it rather than not mentioning it all. And the third point was a minor one, actually. This is on para 4, which talks about rewarding outstanding ethical behavior. So the example that you've given, such as proactively promoting the importance of ethical behavior, that's more on the leadership side. And also it is little vague. I mean, it's not very specific. So could we give a better example? And I could think of one example. Somebody raised ethical concerns despite commercial pressures. That's a good example which should be rewarded. So just think about that. Can we use a better, more forceful example there? And last point, that is not a comment. I mean, I like the use of the word stand back mindset in para 2. So that's a good word you've used. Just my compliments for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amajit. Are there any more comments? Tomoyo, please.
Thank you. First of all, I think naming incentives and incentives makes sense than rewards. And for the especially for the incentives one, this quite relates to penalties and sanctions. So especially what Amajit mentioned about this hiring, I think there will be regional differences for this part. So we have to be careful that this don't conflict with the regional rules and regulations. So maybe add some comments about flexibility there for the disincentive part. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomoyo. Chana, please.
I think I'm just responding to one of Amajit's points on 10. And I think Sunam had also provided some advanced comments on that. And I mean, if you sort of look at it, it's the firm's due diligence when hiring people, right? Before the person actually gets into the job. So I sort of feel maybe we should delete it because we are sort of talking about incentives and disincentives after they are employed. And 10 is really about the firm doing appropriate due diligence and reference checks and so on before they hire the person.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry, Chana. Rich, please.
Yes, I would agree with Chana about deleting 10. I think I probably should have raised this earlier, but I think we've moved into a fairly granular personnel practice here as opposed to a key characteristic or principle of what helps drive and sustain a firm-wide ethical culture. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Javid.
I would say I agree with Rich's comment. Number 10 doesn't belong here either because it's neither an incentive nor a disincentive. But if the project team wants to keep it, it might fit under governance because it is a governance point, right? It's doing your due diligence before you hire. So to me, it is an important governance point. It just doesn't belong in this particular viewpoint sheet.
Thank you for that, David. Amajit, please.
So very quickly, I support the deletion.
Thank you, Amajit. Hector.
In case the text survives in a different section, in an exercise similar to this in the banking sector, one of the points that was raised after the financial crisis was that firms would usually get away with people with unethical conduct without really making a note or firing them, but asking them to resign. So these rotten apples would roll from one basket to the other one without and bringing all those bad practices from one organization to another in the banking industry. So the recommendation in that area was that organizations collaborate with each other, providing recommendations and providing background whenever possible within the confidentiality that doesn't create a liability, so that these rotten apples don't go from one organization to the next. So I don't know if we can take the benefit of that, but that was wisdom decided in a similar scenario.
Thank you for raising that, Hector. So anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Let me just add something on my side of, well, I have my opinion about this, about the substance of this point 10, but along the lines that were mentioned by Hector and by others, this, at least in the financial sector, is business as usual. You know, it's mandatory. So people to be recruited as for any governance role, at least in many parts of the world, there have to be extensive checks about their conduct before they are hired or they go into some position and etc. And it's proved to be, as I think was what Hector has said, an extremely helpful and effective way of reducing the risk of people taking or adopting bad behavior because they are just repeating what they have done before. It also helps with the people circulating between entities, firms, companies, etc., for financial entities after having had demonstrated some unethical behavior. So I see your points about if it fits well here because it's neither an incentive or a disincentive. But I would challenge the board to reflect more on the substance and see if this is helpful or not, if this plays a role or not in contributing to a strong ethical culture within the firm, and see what if there is any other way of addressing this topic, or if it's just something that we should leave to the governance community or to the firms themselves to decide. Rania, please.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, I'm not going to, I mean, I agree with previous comments that were made regarding the fact that perhaps this fits more under governance, one, and secondly, the fact that, I mean, it's not exactly that it's not exactly a disincentive, but my comment is I think, and I understand the wording here because I know it was perhaps the objective was to write it in the form of a disincentive, but generally speaking, I would recommend to the project team to write, I mean, to write the recommendations or viewpoints or whatever, ideas they're trying to convey in a more positive manner. For example, here, I wouldn't suggest that we say that enable a firm to avoid recruiting individuals with known records, but rather to try to encourage the firm to make sure that, they have the individuals that they are recruiting have, proven track records of ethical behavior, or that, because it might, I mean, from an HR point of view, it might come across as, I know that some firms struggle with putting this explicitly in their policies, hiring policies and procedures, because it might suggest that they are being non-inclusive and not giving, people with a certain history, a second chance or whatever. So I understand the objective, definitely agree with it, with the spirit with which this has been written. But if you want to keep it, perhaps I agree with what Rich said. Perhaps, I mean, you may consider that it is a bit too granular to be in this sort of a document, or if you want to keep it, move it to to governance and oversight. But if you want to keep it, I suggest rewording it in a positive manner, and to avoid putting ourselves in this in situation where we are recommending against hiring certain people with certain past, because they may have they may be seeking a second chance. Just something for you to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as far as paragraph 10 is concerned, it seems a practical example of a requirement versus a general principle or a principle of high level. The 9 paragraph before are really general principles, while this one seems to be a procedure, a policy, or a requirement, basically, because it is so precise, so granular that, let's say, it is not consistent with the tone of the entire document. So if we would say that even hiring policies may be informed to ethical concept, I think it would be probably fine. But stating that hiring policies and procedures that enable firms to avoid and so on and so forth, it seems so precise that we are really writing a requirement that, let's say, in practice could be implemented in many ways or even not implemented. But is it really a matter of disincentives? I don't know. I don't think so.
Thank you, Luigi. Anyone else? So I think that we can conclude that there is some agreement around the the underlying objective of this number 10, but a disagreement around the level of granularity and apparent being too prescriptive and etc. So I like your suggestion, Luigi, of trying to rephrase it in a more principles-based way, which is to link hiring policies with ethical behavior in a more high-level way and not so prescriptive. So, well, of course, the project team will take these considerations and see what they will do with this, if deleting or rephrasing, and we'll have an opportunity to decide all that in December. Thank you very much. Laura, back to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the comments. We will definitely take them in our discussions when we revise the document. I just wanted to, sorry, before we close, just wanted to talk very briefly about the next steps. So again, thank you very much for all your comments in this meeting. This will be very helpful in terms of going forward and progressing with the documents and the other outreach that we'll be undertaking in the next weeks. So as you can see on the slide, next week there will be a deep dive session at the Forum of Firms meeting in Madrid. This will be a 90-minute session dedicated to firm culture and governance. We will be discussing two of the viewpoints. So the ethical leadership one, which received quite a bit of support from the board at the September meeting, and also the revised incentives and disincentives viewpoints, as well as those explanatory materials. This session will be presented by Gabriela and Luigi and Ken in person. And then the following week, staff will presenting a firm culture and governance session at the JSS meeting. We will be also discussing with them those two viewpoints and explanatory material. And so this is additional feedback that we'll be getting on some of the papers that we've been developing. And of course, we'll consider all those comments, all that feedback on board when revising those papers. And naturally, the board will also be given an update of those sessions at the December meeting. And so at the December meeting, what can we expect in terms of papers? We will be presenting a revised draft of all 8 viewpoints. So the 7 that we've discussed in September, plus this one on incentives and disincentives. We will also be discussing the revised drafts of the other 2 explanatory materials that we've discussed today, the contextual piece, the overarching piece. We'll be coming back with a revised, more specific plan for other materials and initiatives to undertake in the first semester of next year. So in advance and in preparation of the deliberation that the board will make in June about the framework. And we will also be discussing, as mentioned previously in our meeting, a draft paper on the linkages between the FCG project and ISQM1 to address stakeholder questions in this matter. So back to you, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Laura. And before we move to wrap up this session, I'd like to ask Robert Buchanan if Robert has any comments, or if Robert wants to comment on what we discussed today. Robert, please.
Thank you, Chair, and hello to board members and staff. It's nice to be back with you after some time. And I've enjoyed the discussion today. I'm actually in Scotland today, so it's a good time for me. I'm not in the middle of the night, which is a refreshing change for someone from the other side of the world. I'll just confine my comments briefly to the first part of the meeting, if I may, just on the contextual piece. It was clearly a timely discussion to have, but also it would seem quite helpful in moving things forward. So that was good to hear that. I'd suggest this is still really about the continuous seeking and communicating your thinking on the project objectives, which is what the PIOB and now IOSCO have been making clear in their support for the project, and which Gabriella has continuously acknowledged in her communications to the PIOB and again at the start of this meeting. So that's good. And it just needs to be put in that context, I think. The ultimate output of the project, it needs to be continually communicated that this is a standard setting activity, and those perceptions that were talked about, I think, and the need to get the narrative in the right place. I think that needs to be a key point of that it's this is ultimately about standard setting, even if the ultimate product is still to be determined. And the chair actually acknowledged, Gabriella acknowledged at our PIOB meeting recently that there is this risk of confusion and mixed expectations. She described it as a risk, but some risks do materialize, and this one seems to be materializing. So it's very important. It needs some attention as you proceed, and certainly would urge you to pick up on the discussion and take that forward into the December meeting. The terminology, of course, is an inherent problem in a topic like this. I don't need to add to anything there. It'll probably evolve as you move forward. Just a quick point on the field testing. Interesting to hear a couple of comments on that. Now, this has been discussed at the POB a bit. There's some support for field testing, but recognizing that this is when you're ready and at the appropriate time, and of course with clear clarity as to what it's supposed to achieve. So please keep that on the table as you proceed. But I think it's certainly something to be debated when you get to having a product that's ready to be field tested. As one of the board members said, just a set of principles is not necessarily capable of being field tested, but something more substantive like the document that you've just discussed may well be. And very pleased to hear this will be discussed at the Forum of Firm meeting in Madrid, and I wish you well with that discussion. Just finally on the IESBA coordination, appreciated the report back on that. And the comments made by one board member, I think, about the different perceptions of quality management and what ISQM1 itself does and does not do within the firm. It seems that you've only just sort of started on this coordinated journey with the IESB, so it's going to be very important to progress that, because as you all know, the need for coordination between the two boards is something that the regulatory community and also my board has been encouraging you on very strongly. So it'll be good to see some significant progress happening on that before the December meeting. And I think that IOSCO perspective is very helpful. It's always seemed to me personally that some sort of a gap analysis is what's needed between the ISQM standard, which of course applies to the auditing practice and not more broadly across the firm. That's a critical thing. And so that was a good suggestion, and be helpful for that to be progressed with priority with the IESB liaison people, who I note with pleasure are my fellow countrymen from New Zealand. Otherwise, a very positive discussion and very good to listen to. Thank you, Gabriella, and I hope those comments are helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you very much, Robert, for the support and for the advice, and for reinforcing the messages that we had already received from the PIOB. But it's better to hear it from your voice as a PIOB representative. Yes, we will keep on working with IESB on sooner than later, trying to have something that clarifies the differences between ISQM1 and whatever we want to deliver. This is another area of apparent confusion and miscommunication sometimes, because that not only the intent, the objectives, but also the product in itself are not intended and will not be contradictory, overlapping, etc., raising issues on one side or the other. But of course, this entails and involves a close collaboration along the way, and that's exactly what we are doing. So December is going to be a busy meeting addressing all these documents that Laura mentioned. The staff team will be also very busy from now on. It's going to be a 6 weeks period until the board meeting. The documents have to be posted a while before. So I think that you will wish them also good work for the next weeks. So I think this is a wrap up. This was an excellent meeting, let me tell you. I think that the board is really contributing strategically for what we need to do. We heard loud and clear that there is effort to be made in terms of clarification, communication, but also clarifying ourselves where we want to go. And this is exactly the path that we want to go. These documents, and mainly this contextual piece, was exactly aiming at already serving that purpose, because we are well aware the commitment to listen and to be responsive to what we hear is in place. But it's good to hear from the board members that here and there, and it's very significantly in some areas, there is still work to be made, and maybe we will at some point test you in some with some evolutions that we may want to make. The message has to be clear. We will try to clarify it as much as possible, but the work has to be done as well, because again, there will be no miracles in June if we don't progress and prepare something which is really something that then by then we can decide whatever in which direction and which format and etc., which content it will include. So thank you. I wish you all a very good weekend, and I think that we will keep speaking, some of us at least. But if not, we will meet in December in New York to have substantive discussions about what the project team and the board advisors will be able to deliver and submit for that discussion. Thank you, and see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.